leadership starts with influence, but how we steward that influence impacts how we're able to really live out our leadership. What does the core of influence look like? So if leadership starts with influence, what does it mean to really develop that influence that gives us the platform to lead from?
Top leaders, meaningful conversation, actionable advice, bulldoze complacency, ignite inspiration, create impact. Produced by Southwestern family of companies. This is the Action Catalyst.
Are you interested in advertising with the Action Catalyst? Our listeners could be hearing about your brand right here, right now. For details, shoot us an email at info@theactioncatalyst.com.
Jenni Catron has a knack and a love and a passion for putting feet to vision, as she says, and making vision reality. She has had this book, and I've known about it for several months. It's called Clout, Discover and Unleash Your God-Given Influence. So without further ado, please help me welcome the one and only Mrs. Jenni Catron. Jenni, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share a little bit more about the book. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
You know, why did you write this book? Like, where did the idea come from? How did you get started?
Yeah. You know, I've always been a leadership junkie. Like, I don't know that even as a kid, I knew what the word was, but I knew what leadership looked like. And it was something that I was really drawn to. So, so I think just my whole life, I've kind of aspired to understanding leadership and what helps leaders tick and, how we influence others and what that looks like. And so this book, Clout, really is a lot of my heart kind of in written form of like the things that I wished I had known as a leader earlier on, so maybe that I wouldn't have misstepped, in some certain ways along the way. And Clout, Discover and Unleash Your God-Given Influence, is just that idea that leadership begins with influence. I think John Maxwell is quoted with saying leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Mm-hmm. And I'll often push back on that a little bit to go, I think leadership starts with influence, but how we steward that influence impacts how we're able to really live out our leadership. So, so this was what does the core of influence look like? So if leadership starts with influence, what does it mean to really develop that influence, develop that clout, if you will, that gives us the platform to lead from? And so this was kind of a journey for me of saying, you know what, I see a lot of things in my life that are holding me back or hindering me, tripping me up from really being the leader I should be. And, we talk about those in the book. I call them the clout killers. But then also going, okay, so what do we do with that? Like, how do we really cultivate our influence? How do we cultivate our clout in such a way that we can allow that sphere of influence that we've been given to impact others, to really allow that to thrive and for that to shine? So that's the heart and the spirit behind the book.
And the 7 clout killers, as you call them, are really transformational, and they're very real, and they're things that leaders don't even like to admit that they struggle with.
Yeah. I think, and that's the truth. And it's really the thing that stuck out with all of the clout killers for me is, what are the things that I don't want to admit are there? But we all know that when we just keep stuffing something, we really aren't dealing with it. It's affecting us whether we're recognizing it or not. And so what I found is I was kind of doing my research for the book and, my personal stories from my leadership, other leaders that I kind of studied. I discovered that this fear issue was really almost kind of the root. I call it the front runner of all the clout killers. It's like fear triggers all these other things. So I fear that I'm not enough, so I deal with jealousy. I fear not having enough, so I deal with scarcity. I fear that I'm not good enough, so I live with insecurity. Like, you see how just this fear of different things impacts our influence and our leadership in different ways. So it's really when I boiled it down, like anything, like I'm maybe not engaging, there's usually some fear behind it. Like, sure. I fear chaos, so I grapple for control. And I think a lot of us as leaders, we like to kind of get a good handle on our situations and like to be able to control our world. And really that's the fear of chaos, so just so many of these different issues, there's just kind of an underlying fear all the time of, am I enough? And I think when we kind of just are willing to acknowledge that, then we position ourselves to be able to grow from it and learn from it. Fear kind of impacts you in different ways. Sometimes it causes us to hide. Sometimes it causes us to isolate ourselves and kind of close ourselves off. And then sometimes it just paralyzes us, which I think for a lot of us as leaders, it just paralyzes us. I think you've got to exchange that fear for what's true, and I think there's an old quote. I don't know that I actually used it in the book, but what's the stat of how many of the fears we have actually don't happen, right?
Yeah.
Like we've all heard of that, of how many fears that we have actually don't happen. And the thing that stuck out to me when I was studying this and actually looking at some scripture for just biblical foundation for this was that I think a lot of times we want to believe that we just are going to overcome fear and we're never going to face fear. And over in scripture, like when the biblical characters would face fear, God he would say, do not fear. But he didn't say, do not fear because being fearful is stupid. He said, do not fear because he had a response for this. He had a way he was going to handle this, that he was there. He was the great reward. I'm with you. Like over and over when a leader was dealing with fear, God was responding with how he was there to help lead them through that. And so I think, when we're confronting fear, so if you're a person of faith, there's a lot of biblical truth that we can kind of hold on to suggest that God is with us through this. And, even if you're not a person of faith, there's still truth behind things that sometimes we allow those fears to convince us of. We kind of just spin off into all the worst case scenarios. And when you stop and you go, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? What's the real truth of if the worst thing happened, what does that mean? So it's kind of that idea of exchanging that fear for just what's true, just getting rational for a minute, because what does fear do? It makes us irrational, most of the time.
So now the next one is a comparison. And this one I think is so acute. Why is it a cloud killer?
Yeah. And I think comparison, it's almost natural, like we are kind of wired to just compare everything from the time we're born, like we get the growth percentile chart things, that tell us how we're stacking up to the rest of, kids in our age group. And I think our culture just conditions us to compare ourselves to everyone else. But the danger in that is that, and this is kind of the spirit of this whole book, the danger in that is that I believe that God has given us like this unique sphere of influence, this unique set of gifts, talents, experiences, and opportunities that no one else has your specific like mix of those things, right? And so when we compare, I'm not ever going to be you. I'm not ever going to be able to lead the way you lead, to, encourage people the way you encourage people, to inspire people. Like, I'm not wired exactly like you. We might have some things that overlap. We have a lot of things that we enjoy. But if I try to be you, then I'm going to sabotage the thing that makes me me. And so, I think that comparison thing, I think we're just so naturally wired by society to give into it that we don't even realize that we're doing it. And what I feel like we do in that is we miss really cultivating and developing the influence we have. In trying to mimic somebody else, we actually sabotage our own growth.
What's the difference between comparison and jealousy? Because those two kind of seem to maybe dovetail or be related.
Yeah, they do kind of dovetail. And I think, comparison is I can look at what somebody else is doing and I can like try to be that. Jealousy, it gets to that icky place where now I'm really like striving and working towards, being jealous or envious of what somebody else is doing. So it really kind of makes it about trying to almost sabotage the other person. Like jealousy kind of takes that nasty twist of, I say it's kind of like a cancer that eats away at everything that's good in our relationship. So jealousy takes that to, okay, now you're my enemy because I'm jealous of what you've accomplished. Now it's not that I've just compared myself and I've tried to mimic you. Now it's that, oh, you're now my enemy because I want to be like you and I see where our gaps are different. And so I'm going to start being jealous of that, and it's going to start eroding the relationship component. You start that comparison, and then it turns into, and at one point I talk about jealousy as kind of the irrational fear of losing something or someone valuable to you. So it's that all of a sudden it becomes a competition, and that's where fear kind of mixes into the whole equation. And yeah, jealousy just goes to kind of that ugly place of now you're my enemy rather than somebody I'm celebrating because of you stewarding your God-given influence.
So scarcity is the fourth one.
Yeah, I think, this was one of the ones that kind of snuck up on me and surprised me as a leader. And I think, I grew up kind of in a, just a, lower middle class family. So we had, we struggled to make ends meet some days,
Sure.
But in that, there were some good things that I learned in just, being frugal and making sure I managed my money well. And, so there were certainly some really good principles that came from that. But what it did is it taught me to kind of hoard a little bit more than normal, and not just resources. It kind of, it just was this overarching tendency to just be scarce with everything, because there's kind of this underlying fear that there's not enough, so when you grow up, and so a lot of us, I think, come by that scarcity mentality, honestly, maybe, so I grew up in a home that didn't have just a lot of resources. So I can be scarce with resources, but maybe somebody grew up in a home where there wasn't a lot of love given or shown.
Sure.
And so you don't even realize it because it's just the culture you came from, but you can hoard, just a affirmation and really loving and serving others well. And so I think, we have to kind of look at that and go, is there a place in my leadership where I have a tendency to hoard? So another one where I think this shows up a lot is, if you're a leader and you're positioned for influence, are you taking all of those opportunities for the spotlight or, to bring the idea to the table, or are you, really empowering other staff to be the ones to share that or to bring that up or to get the spotlight or, so I think that's where you see it happen a lot in leadership, is that we're not quick to give the praise or the attention to other leaders around us.
And the next one is insecurity. And these are definitely connected.
Yeah. And this is the one that none of us want to admit, right? It's there, and it's, and I describe it as a perpetual lack of confidence, and I think we can all relate to that. But the problem is when we kind of live in that perpetual lack of confidence, it is impacting everyone else around us. And so, I think you've got to be willing to identify that and realize where insecurity is kind of holding you back from living out your influence in a healthy way. It's a biggie, and it can show up a lot of different ways, and I think we cover it up in a lot of ways.
The next, pride. So pride is the sixth. So we've got fear, comparison, jealousy, scarcity, insecurity. And I know that pride is often a sign of people who are covering up something else.
Yep. In the book, talking about pride, the Webster's definition is inordinate self-esteem, or excessive confidence in oneself. And when I started to unpack this and look at other leaders and myself and, see where pride shows up, it's really the illusion of excessive self-esteem, so that goes back to that insecurity piece of that, as leaders, rarely are we just really that prideful. We're actually lacking some, self-esteem. And so we're trying to project that we have something that we don't actually have. So it's kind of like pride and insecurity end up this big ball of mess where pride's trying to cover up. It just all becomes one big jumbled mess that we're trying to untangle.
That's huge. Well, the last one, control.
That's a funny one because as leaders, we're so driven, right? And, we have such a drive that kind of pushes us, and we step into moments where leadership is necessary. So we are kind of known for being the ones to take control when control is when that's necessary. But there's kind of a dark side to it where when it's, there's a lot of conversations about the importance of servant leadership, and that as leaders, we have to recognize that it's our job to help others shine. And so when you see control creeping in, it's when you're really longing for power rather than like longing for influence. And I think that's a real distinction that's important in that, this longing for power is an indicator that we're not content with the influence we're given. So if we're trying to, manufacture control of a situation, I often talk about like the idea of, we've been given this influence, our leadership, our clout, and it's kind of placed in our hands as this thing we're responsible to kind of caretake, to steward. But I'm one of those people who loves control. So what do? I kind of curl my fingers around it and I kind of put a death grip on it and try to manipulate and control everything, And what happens? You're squeezing the life out of it rather than letting it grow and develop. And so I think we have to look for that tension in ourselves as leaders is, when am I being responsible for the influence I have, and I'm gently kind of guiding it and directing it? Or when am I trying to like manipulate it and control it? And I mean, you're going to be the best gauge for yourself on when you're doing those things and when it's moving to control rather than influence, if that makes sense. But there's a real dance there because as leaders, we do need to step up and actually lead, but that can cross the line into controlling, obsessive control if we're not careful.
Wow. Well, Jenni Catron, folks, you can check her out, jennicatron.com. Jenni, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for what you do as a leader, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk this through with you, and I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.